Hello, welcome to the channel. So I've been lucky enough to get my hands on one of these, the Analogue Pocket. This video is going to include an unboxing, a tour of the menu, some gameplay and some other stuff. It's going to be followed up shortly with some further videos, so stick around. Before we get started, why not consider subscribing to the channel? My main focus is on retro goodness. I've done about 100 videos covering video games, vintage toys, films and loads of other stuff. Subscribing is obviously free to you, but it will mean the world to me. But for now, let's have a look at the Analogue Pocket. So very quickly, what is the Analogue Pocket? It's a few things, but primarily it's a handheld device that uses FPGA technology to simulate the original hardware. Out of the box, it can run Game Boy, Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games. With adapters, it can also run Game Gear, Atari Lynx, TurboGrafx and Neo Geo Pocket games. In terms of the screen, it has 1600 by 1140 resolution, sitting on a 3.5 inch screen. That's more pixels per inch than any iPhone that's currently in circulation. Through its rechargeable battery, it can hold about 7 hours of power. And finally, it's currently retailing for $219. So as you can see, it's a fairly basic but slick box that it comes in, nondescript apart from a little logo at the front and obviously the sticker at the back, and there's not really many clues as to what's inside. It's not too dissimilar from your typical Apple device, I guess. Trying very hard not to cut my hand in half and lose any fingers that I really need in order to be playing this thing, but let's crack open the cellophane and take a look at what we got. It's all very nice packaging, but clearly that is not why we're here. So let's crack this bad boy open. And just from looking at the dimensions of the box, it's very, very obvious that you're not going to get much more in there than the actual Analogue Pocket itself. But first impressions are very good. You know, it's a beautiful looking device, clearly very well made. And as you can see, there's not much more in the box. Underneath the Analogue Pocket itself, you've got a couple of things. So I mean, first of all, you've got a little envelope, a booklet that's got a few bits in there. So there's some stickers, FPGA, what kind of transfers, the Analogue logo itself, and then very, very simply a high-level guide, which is, you know, it's covering the buttons that are fairly self-explanatory anyway. And then there's a QR code on the back if you want to have a look at the more detailed instructions. And the only other item left in the box is the cable. And as I'm about to show you, it's a USB-C connection, which, as I gather, is solely used for charging. It's a simple button layout, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You've got your D-pad, your 8-way directional pad on the front, your 4 buttons on the right, and then there's select analog and start buttons at the bottom. And then if you flip to the side, you've got a micro SD card slot, and I think that's the speaker at the top on one side. And then you can see the cartridge slot there on the back, and the power button and volume buttons on the side. There's a few ports at the bottom. You've got your link port, your USB-C, there's a power indicator, infrared transceiver. You've also got the 3.5mm output for your headphones. And at the back you can see the cartridge slot, and then either side you can see the shoulder buttons. Not too much to say about the buttons. The D-pad feels nice. You've obviously got the 4-button cross as opposed to what was the more acute angled setup of the 2-button Game Boy. For the GBA, the Game Boy Advance, you've got the shoulder buttons. You need a little bit of a press to get them going, so I'm not too sure if there's going to be as responsive as the GBA ones, but we'll see. And here we go into the first boot up. Literally a couple of seconds on that power button and it springs into the welcome screen. I did opt for the tutorial, but to be frank, didn't learn that much from it. It covers, you know, the buttons predominantly at the bottom and at the side, but very self-explanatory in nature, apart from activating the mute, which you do by holding down the plus and the minus volume buttons. It was all very, you know, very obvious in my opinion. I must say the actual volume buttons themselves aren't the best in my opinion, in terms of you do have to push them in quite a bit in order to change the volume. and there's little indication on the screen as well. Apart from a plus and a minus, you don't get a range, like a volume range like you typically see on, say, an iPhone. Straight away after I scrolled through the end user license agreements, it was a prompt message that said I needed to get the latest firmware. So out the packet it was on 0.9, 1.0 is now available. A little bit of a faff doing this. The instructions are clear, it's fairly simple to do, but you have got to use a micro SD card. You've got to get on your Mac or your PC to get the file on there, and then you stick it into the side of the device. Would have been a bit more straightforward in my opinion to leverage, if it was on there, Bluetooth or even the USB-C cable to transfer it. And it feels like you're going to lose the thing in the device, but you can obviously get, retrieve it when you need to. And with the card in there, you can literally just hit the power button and it will boot up the firmware update. It didn't take too long to process, probably about 10 minutes or so. It felt a bit laborious halfway through, but as soon as it got to 80%, it kind of sped up like Roadrunner, and then very quickly got to the 100% mark. And with that, it reboots and you're good to go. So although you get the USB-C lead, you don't get a plug with the device. So fortunately through my Mac Pro, I could just use the plug from that, plug in the Analogue Pocket USB-C, which I'm sure is just a standard lead, and then use that to charge the device up. With the plug in and it powered up, you immediately see the amber indicator light at the bottom. It goes green when it's fully charged. And at this point I felt obliged to grab my wife's Game Boy and do a side-by-side comparison. So as you can see, in terms of the height of the device, there's not much in it really. The Analogue Pocket is slightly taller, but like I say, it's probably about a centimetre or so. I got a bit geeky with the weights and I had to compare the two. Again, not much in it. 227 grams for the Game Boy, 272 grams for the Analogue Pocket. This section really just gives a high-level overview of some of the settings on the Pocket. So again, I booted up. Fairly quick jumping in there. Going into the tools section. So there's a couple of apps in here, Nanoloop and GB Studio, that I haven't yet tried. But I will do, and I'll probably do a subsequent video on them. I know one of them is a bit of a music studio. And now just having a quick look at what's within the Systems menu. If you click on Systems, you've got each of the Game Boy devices, the original Game Boy, the Color, the Advance, etc. And then the sub-menus around the video, the audio, etc. So I had a little play with these. The main one was the display mode, which I'll give some examples on later on in the video. You've got sharpness, and then you can actually adjust the width, height and position of the screen, and you can do this for each of your Game Boy devices. Audio for the main Game Boy is very, very high level. It's just a 0 to 10. I then looked at the similar settings, but this time for the Game Boy Advance. So you've got some display settings where you can basically make it look like the original Game Boy Advance or the SP101, or you can do the enhanced Analogue Pocket version. There's also an audio setting as well, which I tried a little bit later on in the video. You've also got some broader settings, like for the Pocket, whereby you can adjust the brightness. It's fairly bright, out of the box. So anything for me beyond like 50, 55 would probably be a bit overbearing. You've also got some sound settings around impedance, which I didn't really play with that much, and then a global reset. As part of the new iOS, which is 1.0, there are some beta items in there, which I haven't tried, but I know they include save states. I'll try them on a later video. That's pretty much it in terms of the settings, so you can revisit the EULA if you really wanted to, look at the release notes, some legal points, and also some special thanks, some mentions at the end. So clearly I wanted to play a game, so I whacked in R-Type, or R-Type 2, and had a quick blast on this. So I do try a Game Boy game and also a Game Boy Advance game. Fairly quick to boot up, obviously not as quick as the original Game Boy, where you slide it over and then straight away it jumps on screen, but not really too much a delay. Screen itself is beautiful, extremely bright, really good, definition, and it's defaulted to, as we'll see in a second, the analog kind of enhanced settings as opposed to the original video settings. So if you go into the display mode, yeah, you can see it's the analog, but you can also take it back to its roots. You've got the original Game Boy there, you've got the Gameboy Pocket, the light, which gives it a bit of a green tinge, and then a bit of a Larry Pinball neon matrix colour. But all of them are, are exceptional. Even with what must be an element of upscaling, it doesn't distract in any way the clarity of the graphics. There's certainly no kind of flickering or distortion anywhere. It's very, very smooth. You've also got a further graphical setting under the Analogue Pocket Video, so the display mode, whereby you can change the colour palette. As we can see here, as I flick through, you've got tinges of blue, green, purple, etc. An extra touch, not something I'll necessarily be using that much, but not a bad added extra. So after blasting the enemy of the Bido, I felt like some Game Boy Advance, so I popped in Super Mario Advance just to see really how the colour palettes would work. And again, hopefully you can see from the video, it's very, very clear, beautifully done colours, very bright but not overbearing, exceptionally nice screen. You've got similar settings here apart from the GBA, and you can go back to the original GBA setting. So not as powerful, as punchy with the colours, but again, if you want to go back to those nostalgic roots, then it's a setting you may want to pursue. But in my opinion, if you're going to do that, you might as well just pick up the original hardware. But to see the enhancements that the Pocket brings through that, the Analogue Pocket setting, that's kind of where it's at for me, and where it's it excels graphically. And then just a few seconds of me playing terribly at Mario. And I had to go back to a Game Boy game, so I picked up Soda Striker, chucked it in. Sure, it's a game that's familiar to most of you, but take a listen. Hopefully this does it a bit of justice, but the sound is exceptional, very powerful and very clear. Then changing up a gear, really just focusing on the audio, I put in Final Fight 1 for the Game Boy Advance. Take a listen. Really, it's another game that showcases, the powerful performance of the Analogue Pocket speaker. It's only been a couple of days, but here's my initial thoughts on the system. In terms of pros, I've got to say the screen is beautifully done. You've got multiple display options ranging from the authentic and original visuals to more modern ones. The design itself is very slick, it's beautiful aesthetics, seemingly very well made, and it's very comfortable to hold. The battery life, plenty of time to play all your favourite games without having to dash to recharge. But things aren't all perfect, and there's certainly some considerations that I spotted. Firstly, with the firmware, transferring information by the SD card, it isn't difficult, but you do need a memory card, and you do need a way to get the file onto it. I was hoping the USB-C may come into play, but it doesn't. Also, the shoulder buttons, not that easy to get to in my opinion, fairly close to the cart. Also with the volume control, it's not that easy to press. Although it indicates when you have pressed it, and it shows a plus or minus on the screen, you don't see a volume range like you typically see on an iPhone. So in terms of early impressions, I've only had the Analogue Pocket for a couple of days, but I've got to say I am particularly impressed. At $219, it feels like good value for money. Very, very good build quality, great user interface. For me personally, it's resurrected my love even further of some of those retro classics, and I look forward to some of the future adapters that will allow me to play systems that I'm less familiar with, such as the Neo Geo Pocket. Yes, there's some quibbles, hopefully some of those for sure can be addressed through firmware. I'll be doing more videos on the topic as I get closer to the device, and I hope to see you on the next one. All the best. Cheers.